And now the moment we've all been waiting for. Earl is going to deliver the Devar Torah.
These are the words which Moses spoke to all Israel. This is how the book of Devarim opens. It's an extraordinary thing for Moses, or for the text to say about Moses. I mean, this is the man who at the beginning of his, I guess you could call it his assignment, his ministry, said in Exodus chapter 4, I have never been a man of words. Lo ish Devarim Anochi. Now, I can see that in the translation before you, it doesn't come across that starkly, but that's what the Hebrew says. He was not a man of Devarim, but he learned to be. He struggled to learn this. He struggled speaking to Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the world. He struggled as a leader speaking to the people. He struggled in peace and he struggled in war. And then he wrote the most widely published, most read, and most revered words in human history. Moses became a man of words. Not too bad. Deuteronomy is written in Moses' voice. So who can tell me what is the most common beginning of a Torah reading? What words? Yeah, so we know that. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. The Lord said to Moses, saying. And then what happens is, you see this particularly in the books of Leviticus and Numbers, then Moses just repeats God's words. But in this book, Moses tells his own story in his own words. And when you see I, it most often, the I means Moses, not the Lord. He does have some quotes from God, but largely it's Moses' words. And the funny thing is, there's some little differences in the way that he tells, these first 5 chapters. He's really just giving a summary of the experience of wandering for 40 years. But there's some little differences. Like, he takes full credit for setting up tribal leaders to help him rule the nation. Who's missing from this story? Yeah, Yitro. He tells the story of the spies by saying to the people, you asked me to send the spies, and I approved of the plan. Okay, now how is that told earlier? It's in the book of Numbers, chapter 13. God orders him to send the spies into the land. Moses' approval is not necessary. I feel like I'm reading a resume that's been enhanced a little bit, And then he says flat out, only Caleb will live to enter the land. Who's missing from that story? Joshua. Now, in fairness, he does add Joshua 2 verses later, almost like Joshua was an afterthought. Okay. Since Joshua leads the nation to the land, I find that a bit startling. The most common example of this, it's not in our portion, is in Exodus, we remember the Sabbath day, but in Deuteronomy we Shamor, usually translated keep the Sabbath day. And that's caused a lot of grief. And then my favorite one on this is in chapter 1, verse 37. I know a lot of what I'm talking about is not in what we actually read today, but it's in the Parashat. Read it all. He says to the people, he starts what becomes a Deuteronomy staple of criticizing the nation. I mean, he really takes them to task and blames them for things. And the first thing he says is, because of you, the Lord was incensed with me too, and he said, you shall not enter it either. Huh? Okay, I seem to recall there was this place called Kadesh, and they had the thing about striking the stone or speaking to the stone where it clearly says that Moses disobeyed God. And because of that, he did it himself. That's why he doesn't enter the land. But he's blaming it on the whole nation. Despite all of this, I'm not trying to beat him up too much. I think it's just interesting to see the little differences. Look, Deuteronomy is his book. It's his story. And he gets to tell the story the way that he remembers it, the way he thinks. And anyone who is married should understand this phenomenon. But his speeches in this book are important. They're preparing the people to enter the land. And that importance is reflected by the fact that one of the ancient names for the book of Deuteronomy was, are you ready for this? Mishnah Torah. All right? Where else what other book was called Mishnah Torah? Who wrote another book? The Rambam. The other Moses Maimonides, right, of whom we say from Moses to Moses, there was no one like Moses. And literally it means a repetition of the Torah. And so does the English word Deuteronomy. It's really Greek deutero, second, nomi, law. But I'm not really comfortable calling this a repetition of the Torah. And there's two reasons why. One of them is, all right, how many commandments do we have? The big number, 613. Yeah, the 10's just the foretaste. Okay. Deuteronomy contains only 200 commandments, so it didn't repeat all of it. It's being selective about repeating, though there is a lot of repetition. But of those 200, 70 of them are brand new. Okay? So that's what, somewhere more or less a third are brand new. So Deuteronomy is much more than just a repetition of the Torah. And the second reason that I think the book is important is the way that the word Torah is used. And right up in chapter 1, verse 5, it says, Et ha-Torah hazot. Moses began explaining this Torah. And I know in the Eitz Chaim it translates Torah correctly as instruction, right? That's the base meaning of the word Torah. But those of you who know me know that people ask me, well, what does that word mean? I always say, and I stand on this, words don't mean anything. People mean things, and they use words to try to convey what they mean. So it's not correct to say that Torah always just means instruction. We know it means a lot more than that. When does it start meaning a lot more than that? And some scholars point to this verse in our Parashat today, because he's referring to not just Torah instruction, but it's beginning in this sentence, et ha-Torah. I'm really focused on the word ha, which is the definite article like the in English. The Torah. That's beginning to sound like an authoritative set of instructions, a book. And Deuteronomy is where that begins to happen with the language. So all taken together, I view this parashah as what I call Moses triumphant. His words, his way of telling the story, his book, HaTorah. Now, next week's parashah begins with Moses retelling the story about how he pleaded with God to let him enter the land. He opens himself up to the people. I call that Moses vulnerable. But that is another story. And if anyone can tell me what my little pop culture reference was just there at the end, I'll give you an extra point.
That is another story.
That's another story. Moses is vulnerable. He makes himself vulnerable to the nation. Right? Whereas in this parashah, man, Moses is the man.